Welcome to today's impromptu live video. I certainly was not planning on doing this video live. I suppose I should start out and say this is my decks I use the most during the 78 Deep Challenge video. And I filmed this 3 or 4 times already, and I keep having tech problems. So I'm like, you know what? We're just gonna, with this crappy lighting, go live and chat about these decks kind of once and for all style. And hopefully have no hiccups. So please say hello in the chat. I will be glancing over there periodically, but we're just going to take a look at the decks that I used during the 78 Deep challenge, or the decks I used the most, I should say. A little bit of backstory. For those of you that have no idea, oh goodness, I did not, sorry if that made anyone seasick. That was not what I meant to do at all. Where was I? A little bit of backstory. If you don't know what the 78 Deep challenge is, it is a tarot challenge that I hosted this year where we went through all 78 cards of the tarot and really looked at each card through the lens of story, through the lens of what that card meant to us. It was really a challenge and course, because I hosted a course centered around self-exploration and getting to know yourself through the tarot. And through that study, some people chose to use one deck to deep dive with, and I took a very different approach and used whatever deck from my collection that I felt intuitively drawn to each day. So sometimes these were decks that I just woke up and was like, I feel called to this deck today. Sometimes it was out of convenience. Like the deck was on my desk for another reason and I just pulled from that deck. Sometimes I pulled the deck out specifically to look for like a certain card that I knew I wanted to touch on the depiction of, because as the facilitator of the course and challenge, part of what I did was every single day I wrote a post for my course people about the meaning of that card. So having a variety of different imagery and sources to pull from is really important to me. Now, that being said, of course, there are decks here that I used more than others, and I really want to kind of go over that and just speak about each deck with you, review whether I was surprised by the fact that I used that deck so much, because there are a few of those. And I want to take a moment and mention a few that didn't make this kind of show and tell list. So, with all that being said, grab yourself some type of beverage and let's just strap in. So, over the course of the 13 weeks, 78 days, I used a total of 19 different decks. And there were several decks that I used only once or twice, so I haven't pulled those out. One, because this video would never end. And two, because I don't even own some of these decks anymore. So those decks that I want to honorably mention are the Santa Muerta Tarot, which is actually the deck that I chose the order of the challenge with, which is super fun. The Lightseers Tarot, which I no longer have because I sent it out in mailers to my Moments of Me summer students. So that's really exciting. Along with that, the Elemental Tarot by Taroteca Studio. I do no longer have that deck either for the same reason. I also used the Modern Love Tarot, the Nameless One Tarot, the Runic Tarot, which is my husband's deck actually, the Star Child Tarot Akashic Edition, which is in the I might pass on pile at the moment, and last but not least, the Happy Tarot, which ironically I actually have right next to me because I have pulled out recently to begin working with again. But let's just not get sidetracked here. So with that, I have the different piles in front of me, so you have a little sneak peek on what I'm going to share. But there are 5 different categories. So the first one are decks that I pulled 3 cards from, or used 3 times during the challenge. The second grouping is decks I used 4 times during the challenge. The third grouping is decks that I used 5 times during the challenge. The fourth grouping is decks that I used 10 times during the challenge. And then, of course, I have one deck that rules them all that I used 14 times during the challenge. Now, if you're one of those people who sat there and did the mental math to add them all up, there were days where I, for whatever reason, didn't pull a depiction of the card. I just used the RWS picture on the post, and that was that. So nothing to show you here, and I did not count that in my tallies. Whew, okay. Let's just dive into it, shall we? I'm going to breeze through a couple of decks just for brevity's sake. And again, if you're watching live or even in the comments, let me know, say hello. But this deck here is the first deck on the list. It's the Ritual Tarot by Tierra May. And this deck, I'm just not like feeling the feels with right now. So I'm not feeling like I want to spend a bunch of time talking about it. Also ignoring the fact that we've recorded this video 3 times before. But anyway, this is the Ritual Tarot by Tierra May of the 2022 printing, I believe. It now comes with different backs and names and all the things, but this is a really interesting collage deck that I do enjoy. I find it extremely intuitive, and when I'm in the mood for this deck, like when I'm feeling the feels of this deck is on point. It's beautiful. I love that there's no titles. It's really unique in that way. And because there's no titles, I find that I get to have a really unique reading experience with it, where sometimes I mistake one card for another card, which would sound frustrating, but actually it's kind of fun because then you get to think about, oh, why did I have that card come to mind first, and how can I add that layered meaning into, whatever it is that I'm reading about. So very interesting tarot, a deck that I used 3 times during the challenge, one that I'm not like super hot on at the moment, but once I'm kind of in that mood again to really pull this back out and dive in, I know it's going to be just as amazing as it always is. So that's the Ritual Tarot by Tierra May. This next deck I actually spoke about in my video earlier this week, or was that video last week? I think it was last week actually, where I talked about being human. So definitely check that out if you'd like. And after this live is over, if you're watching the replay, then all the links to these things will be in the description box below. But this deck I mentioned in that talk about being human. And this is the Horror Tarot. And I gotta be honest, I love this deck as just like a regular all-rounder Rider-Waite-Smith kind of easy reader. It's one of those decks where you really don't want to use the guidebook. Sometimes I'll glance at it just to, out of curiosity, see what they said. I apologize. My camera hates to focus on this deck, and I don't know why. Sometimes I'll read the guidebook just to see what they said, but usually it's not really in line with how I read tarot or tarot meanings, so I kind of skip over that. But I really enjoy that this deck is full of kind of those spooky monsters. There's all kinds of like fun, spooky, yet still like mystical feeling characters. And none of them are really married, at least from what I can tell, to specific pop culture references, which is something I personally really appreciate. There are definitely a few in here where you could be like, oh, I can see how that might be a depiction of said character or something, but there's really no set in stone references, which I appreciate and really gives it that kind of everyday reader feel to it. And it's one that I pull out quite often and will just kind of sit on my desk and use for the fun of it. And that was why this one popped in, actually, was because it was just on my desk for a while. So that's what I was pulling from for those days. The last deck in this particular grouping, excuse me, my lunch is fighting back, of decks that I used 3 times during the challenge is the Supernatural Tarot. And this is another Insight Editions deck that I'm in love with, to be honest. I'm really not someone who likes these kinds of decks. In fact, these are the only 2 Insight Edition decks that I own, but I'm obsessed with the Supernatural Tarot. I gotta be honest. Like, when I first got it, I was not a fan. Like, at all. I was not impressed with the fact that it's kind of so pippish. Like, there aren't a lot of scenes, especially with such a real history or story to pull from. I thought they could have done like a specific scene depiction for each card. However, now that I've used this for several years, it's become one of my favorite decks. And I actually really appreciate that they didn't pull specific scenes in, that they really left it as characters, because one, they did an excellent job at selecting characters that are in line with each of the cards, but two, it gives you this fun archetype centered reading where even though there's not a scene depicted on the card, if you think about this character and know the show, you have an entire library of like lore around this archetype that you can pull into your reading and use as you're like looking through the lens of this super fun show. So this is one that I'll put away for a long time, but I definitely pull out periodically. As you can see, it's not in the box, so it's one that's kind of on my desk right now, and I just love it. And this was the card, I'm going to end on this, because this was the card that I originally pulled out for the 78 Deep Challenge, because I just feel like this Eight of Swords does such a good job depicting the meaning of the Eight of Swords. In case you aren't familiar, in the show, this is a ghost that they find on the side of the road, and she had a really tragic ending. There was a thing with her kids, I think they got killed as well, and she was kind of trapped in this replaying of this tale and was like bringing people back to her haunted house and like was just trapped in this. And it wasn't until she really confronted the tragedy of what happened and was able to then, cross over, etc., etc. And it just so beautifully illustrates that energy of the Eight of Swords, where you're just like stuck in your head to your own like detriment. So that's my spiel about the Supernatural Tarot. Moving on, decks that I used 4 times during the challenge. So this one here is the Starman Tarot. Now, this is a deck that I got in a deck trade right around the beginning, or actually just before the challenge started. And I have to be honest, I haven't worked with this a ton, so I don't have much to say about the deck itself other than kind of surface impressions, but the guidebook is quite meaty and the cards are very bright and very busy. And I found that during the challenge, when I really wanted a card that had a lot going on, that had some bright colors, and that I could really like sink my teeth into like a new guidebook meaning, because it was a new to me deck, I felt that I really could look at something with a fresh perspective, because again, I hadn't read the guidebook before, and because it's quite beefy, it led just like that nice fun study aspect to it. So I ended up pulling a few cards from this deck, and like I said, I can't say much about the deck itself because I haven't worked with it much since then, but with all these bright colors and the fact that like we're past the summer solstice now and stuff, I'm feeling like maybe this is going to make its way into more of my readings, and I'm excited to get to know it a little bit better and dive into some of this super funky, bright, layered imagery and just see what kind of wisdom it has to show me. So that is the Starman Tarot. Moving right along. So the next deck that I used 4 times during the challenge, actually the next 2 decks, are both vampire decks. The first one that I just want to like briefly talk about here is the Tarot of Vampires by Ian Daniels. This deck, I feel like, needs no real introduction, no explanation, no extensive showcasing of any kind, just because it's so popular within the tarot sphere. I did hear a terrible rumor that this might be going out of print. If anybody knows anything about that, please direct me to the proper resources, because like, OMG. Really blows my mind. But this deck is great. It's just great. Especially as a study deck. You'll see the guidebook's not in here because I keep it on my bookshelf as a guidebook to just reference. In general, it really is a book all on its own. I love that you have all of the astrological associations and the deacons and everything depicted within this deck. It's a really fun study tool in that way. I love the sexy like tones to this. I really enjoy the 3 of Cups card in this. I also adore this Sun card. It's a really great, spooky, kind of sexy, off the beaten path deck that feels mystical and elemental and underworldly, and really gives you a lot to chew on in the guidebook, especially because it doesn't really have a set pure system that it follows. It's definitely a blend of different tarot systems, and I'm not super familiar with Thoth. This is kind of my first introduction into anything of that flavor. It's just a really great deck. Oh, there's the 3 of Cups. Love it. It's just so fun with that like little sexy third party thing going on. It's just fun. So that's Tarot of Vampires by Ian Daniels. The deck I said I was only going to briefly mention and then gushed about for what, like 5 minutes. This next deck is one that I'm really excited to share with you, actually. This is the Tarot V. This deck is a vampire deck. It's not for the faint of heart. If you get like squeamish easily, definitely like shut your camera, click away and mute me for like 5 minutes and come back, or skip ahead of the video because you've been warned. But this is not a cute vampire deck. Like, we have Tarot Vampires by Ian Daniels, which is like sexy, kind of dark, a little like taboo, mysterious, a little confronting, but like you can get on with it, right? Then you have the, is it Tarot? The Vampire Tarot? I don't remember exactly how they put the title, but like, I'm just gonna have to grab it. I tried to pause you like I was filming this. Lol. This one, Tarot Vampires by Charles Harrington. This is a newer one by Llewellyn. This one is very like lighthearted. It's more like young adults. Is like more family friendly. This one, Tarot V, is gross. I love it. It's amazing. But it's, like I said, it's not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of blood. There's some really images that I just straight up don't like because they're disturbing. Like the Hermit card when we get to that. But even though this guidebook isn't very meaty because it is low Scarabeo, you don't get a lot because you do have that beautiful accessibility with the multiple languages, but the way that it's written somehow gives you so much to go on, and it doesn't shy away from those dark things. And as you can see, there's a lot going on with this deck. There's this kind of post-apocalyptic vampire world, and some of it's romantic and sexy, and some of it's just downright scary and gross. And it really deals with the internal world, the conflict of something a vampire might feel as someone who just turned and is then immersing themselves in this world. I love this Labyrinth card for the Three of Wands. But all the pages are vampire hunters or vampire slayers, but the rest of the deck is all vampire. And the guidebook is written as if you, again, like I said, are just waking up and have been turned, and you're now, you know, undead, basically. You now have to live eternally, and all of just the complicated BS that comes with that, and the power struggles and the darkness and light. This is the Hermit card. I just can't. It's so gross. But honestly, I adore this deck for how much I've worked with it so far, which I would say is not a ton. I've definitely worked with this way more than I have with the Starman Tarot, but it's not one that I've spent excessive amounts of time with. I do a lot of my readings at night before bed, and this is just not one that you want to be reading alone in the dark. Let's just say that. But I am excited to continue to get to know it a little better and work with it more. And from what I have, you know, done with it so far, I would say that it is one that I would recommend if you are interested in it. Sorry, I'm just trying to like, this is gonna bug me if things are like all in the wrong kinds of way. All right, moving on to decks that I used 5 times. Honestly, I'm shocked at these 2 decks. I did not think they would make it this high up on the list, like at all. This is the Modern Witch Tarot. And I don't use this deck often unless I'm doing some type of RWS study where I want something just a little different than the regular depictions, or B, if I'm doing readings for clients and I either feel called to pull this deck out or I am not sure how familiar they are with getting tarot readings. I love this extra card. Everything is fine. Then I'll pull this deck out. I do love the fact that there's the different coloring on this deck. The cardstock isn't the best, but I don't mind it. It is a little hard to hold and shuffle because my hands are so small, but I much prefer this glossy cardstock than some of the other matte, annoying cardstocks. We won't get into that, but anyway. Yeah, I was really surprised that I ended up pulling this deck out so many times during the challenge, and to be honest, I can't really tell you why. Like, I don't even remember what cards I pulled from this deck, but it was obviously some because it's on the list. So, oh, this is probably one of them, the Four of Cups. I love her shirt. It says over it. Like, it's so just like that boredom that comes with the Four of Cups. But yeah. Modern Witch Tarot. Very popular. Classic. Excuse me. I was going to try to warn you about that sneeze, but it came too fast. So yeah, like I said, I was quite surprised that I ended up using this one so much, but because I use it so much in readings for other people or in teaching environments, I suppose it makes sense. The other deck in this category, again, came to as a huge surprise to me, which is the Tarot de la Nuit. And this deck, honestly, is one that I thought I might be passing along when I was doing my deck library curation earlier this year. Dude, that lunch is still just kicking my butt. I'll take a sip of water. This deck, though. First off, I love that this King of Swords looks suspiciously like, oh my gosh, The Witcher. Thank you. I'm like, what? I could see his face, but it took me a minute. Anyway, this deck is one that I used a lot when I first got it, which was a very long time ago. And don't use it very often since. I have to be in a very special mood to pull this deck out because it is very, like, again, that young adult fantasy, moody feels. And the guidebook is actually really cool. Again, it's low scare bay, you get tiny blurbs, but each of the blurbs is written as if it's the person within the card that's telling you about their story, which is a really cool thing to just kind of sink your teeth into if you want like a little bite-size piece. And yeah, I don't know. I was just really surprised that I pulled this out so many times, and it made me really rethink my initial thought of rehoming this deck. And like, I feel like this is one of these decks that I despise that I enjoy on some level. I feel like we all have those decks where we're like, I shouldn't like this, but I do. The Happy Tarot being one of them for me, and I feel like this deck is firmly in that category, but I obviously, you know, pulled it out more than some of my other decks that I would have said I enjoy more, or much more, in fact. So I think I'm gonna I'm gonna try to set my judgments aside and use this a little more and see what else it has to offer me. So that is the Tarot de la Nuit. We're down to the last 3. Okay. These next 2 decks, I used 10 times each. Part of that might have been due to the fact that these are the 2 decks I took with me on my vacation earlier this year to Texas. So these were the 2 decks that came on the plane with me. I was using them to post a card every day on social media, like on Instagram and in the course saying, you know, here's the card of the day. However, I was just gone. I was gone for 8 days and I used both of these decks 10 times. So obviously that doesn't really add up, right? So I had to have used them outside of that. This is the Ask the Witch Tarot. It's also funny that they're both witch decks, right? Can we just get a giggle about that? This is the Ask the Witch Tarot. I really enjoy this deck. I don't really like the backs, but I have edged mine in this blue color to help kind of seamlessly transition between the backs and the fronts, just because I don't feel like they go together very well. But even though these are big, sometimes they're hard to handle. The cardstock isn't great. The backs aren't great. I'm obsessed. Like, the guidebook for this deck is really good as like a beginner deck. Each of the major arcanas is associated with a specific goddess. And I think it's done really well. Sorry, my throat's a little scratchy. I'm trying not to cough. Allergies are kicking in here. But I really love it. I love the offbeat colors. I love that it's an RWS, but it's in this like fantasy world that feels very like bizarre, dreamlike. And I always say this every time I show this deck, but it reminds me of the art style from Mr. Pickles, the TV show. And it's just so fun. And is an all-around just really awesome everyday reader. It's great if you want to pull a major arcana and learn a little bit about some goddess or folklore figures. And again, the colors are fun. It's a really cool deck. It's a really cool deck. If you're drawn to it at all, I don't think you can go wrong. And honestly, for such a small guidebook, it does, like I said, an amazing job for any beginner or obviously more skilled readers as well. So that is the Ask the Witch Tarot. This next deck, I'm going to warn you now, it has a lot of nudity in it. If that makes you uncomfortable, thank you for joining me. I will see you another day. But I love it. And I think it's very tastefully done. I don't think we need to debate about it. But anyway, you've been warned. This is the Witch's Tarot by Burning Paper Hearts. I think I mentioned this tarot in my last video as well. The guidebook is, I mean, basically non-existent, so there's that. The cards are this like rose petal finish, which I don't really like because they stick together, but because of this deck, I don't care. I use it anyway. This is a photography tarot deck. It's all women except for there's one photo of the artist in here who is male. But it's so artistic and witchy, and there's something so mysterious and mystical about it. And you're really left to sit with the image and just be like, wow, like what? It's very trippy at times. Sometimes you get ones where you feel like the image is moving, which is cool. And I also really like that this deck also includes extra cards. So there are some extra cards with, again, deities, or there's the Maiden Mother Crone in here, the moon phases. Here's a coven card. It's a really, really fun and interesting deck, and it's pretty much impossible not to feel introspective and like a total sensual badass while you're using this deck. We'll stop on Lilith there because that feels appropriate for the conversation we were having, but yeah. Really, really enjoyed getting to know this deck more over the course of the challenge, and I mean, is there any other gushing I can do? All right, I'm going to take a sip of water again because my voice is getting all weird because of my allergies. That's okay because we're on the last deck, which is no surprise to anyone. This is the deck that I used 14 times during the 78 Deep Challenge. This is the Tarot of the Haunted House, or the Haunted House Tarot by Sasha Graham. This is my ride or die deck. This is my baby deck. This is the deck that sits on my altar. This is the deck I use pretty much every day. Like, I gush about it all the time. It's in every video. I'm sure you're sick of seeing it by now. But I love it. And I couldn't help but use it during the challenge, not only just because I wanted to pull out a card, but also because there's so many cards in here that I enjoy the depiction of that I just wanted to pull it out and share it and show it off. And it really is like a constant companion for me. And I think it's so appropriate for, I mean, personal introspection. All tarot is appropriate for personal introspection, right? But there's something so hauntingly beautiful about exploring the concepts and the story of this deck as the main character, as if it is yourself, and just going through and meeting the different witches, the angels, the demons, the people in the house, and just kind of really seeing yourself inside the story. And there's all these like different scenarios where you find yourself the main character, like looking in on other characters, where you're actually like in the scene. It's just super interesting, and I'm obsessed. So that is it, my loves. Those are the decks I used the most for the 78 Deep Challenge. The Haunted House Tarot is the one I used the most, to no surprise. And yeah, now that I've shared these decks with you, I feel like we can officially wrap up the 78 Deep Challenge. I know that we technically ended like over a month ago, but I don't know, it just didn't feel complete until I did this video. So I hope that you enjoyed it. I apologize that it's not like a nicely edited video. Like I said, I attempted that several times. It just didn't work out. So here we are doing it live. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you're watching the replay, I'm going to drop those links down below if you want to check any of these things out. If you joined us for the 78 Deep Tarot Challenge, I'd love to hear in the comments below what deck or decks that you used during it. And if you would like to take the challenge on your own or join the course and do it at your own pace, both of those options are still available. I'll leave that linked for you as well if you want to check that out. With all that being said, my loves, I will see you again very soon. Take care.